Welcome back to Producing a Disaster. This upload was originally made for the Fringe Radio Network, and I figured I'd upload it here, even though it's about the crash of TWA Flight 800 and has nothing to do with music. I did make the music in it, and I tell the story of the crash because I love a good disaster. I consider myself a disaster. Enjoy.
That's fire.
Hey Fringe listeners, it's Leah Jude, and it is a pleasure to be on the Fringe Radio Network. I have some good news and some bad news. The good news is, we get to hang out for a little while. The bad news is, it's July 17th, 1996, and we all have tickets to Rome, aboard TWA Flight 800. So again, Fringe listeners, we are going to Rome, and we have a stopover in Paris. The Boeing 747-131 we're on today was manufactured by Boeing in July 1971. Our aircraft has completed 6,869 flights with 93,303 hours of operation. Today, the airplane departed from Athens, Greece as TWA Flight 881 and arrived at JFK about 4:38 p.m. to pick us up. The aircraft has been refueled. The second and largest tank is almost empty because we have all the fuel we need to get to Paris without that tank. There was a crew change. Our flight crew consists of 58-year-old Captain Ralph G. Kevorkian, 57-year-old First Officer Stephen E. Snyder, and 63-year-old Flight Engineer Richard G. Campbell. They're highly experienced veterans flying with TWA, so we should be in good hands. We also have a 25-year-old flight engineer trainee named Oliver Crick that's going to be in the cockpit today. Again, in case you haven't checked your calendars, it's July 17th, 1996, and it is a hot night. Even with the sun setting, it's about 87 degrees right now on the tarmac. We're on the plane and we're starting to get kind of annoyed. Little impatient. We're delayed. We were scheduled to depart JFK at 7 p.m., but the flight is delayed due to a disabled piece of ground equipment blocking the plane from backing out of the gate. Hopefully this gets cleared up soon. Oh, and it turns out that there's a piece of luggage under the plane that none of us own. So I guess after they figure out this luggage snafu and match it to a passenger, we'll be on our way. Everybody's turning on their overhead fans. Even though the AC is on in the plane, it's hot. And we're just sick of sitting here. I'm ready to get to Rome. I can see why they're being careful. There's been a lot of terrorist activity lately, specifically involving luggage. Well, it turns out that the mystery luggage belonged to a passenger that's been on the plane the entire time. Finally, we're going to be taken off. I'm getting ready to crack open It Takes a Village by Hillary Rodham Clinton. It's been on the New York Times bestsellers this year. So other than this book I'm about to read, there are 230 souls on board, including 18 crew and 20 off-duty employees. They're meant to cover the Paris to Rome leg of the flight. Again, we have a stopover in Paris. Hopefully it goes by quick. I'm really looking forward to getting to Rome. We're finally pushing back from gate 27. The flight crew has started the engines at 8:04. However, because of the previous maintenance undertaken on engine number 3, the flight crew only started engines number 1, 2, and 4. Engine 3 is finally being started now, 10 minutes later. It is 8:14 p.m. and we are ready to finally start. Oh, sorry. I was really into this book. We haven't been in the air long, but so far, everything's been pretty uneventful. Seems like we're getting a lot of heading changes or something like that. The plane's been turning quite a bit. I think that we're just getting lined up to get to our cruising altitude. It's a beautiful night to be on a plane. Pretty good visibility. Scattered clouds. It's dusk. I didn't want to alarm anyone, but earlier I was walking by the cockpit, and I ended up hearing something that the captain said. He said, quote, "Look at that crazy fuel flow indicator there on number 4. You see that? Somewhere in here I better trim this thing. In, up. First officer. Huh? Captain Kevorkian? Someplace in here I better find out where this thing's trimmed." I wonder what he was talking about. Crazy fuel flow indicator. I don't know what that is. Boston Center has also instructed us to climb to 15,000 feet. And this is where our story ends. In case you weren't following our flight, the last radio transmission from the airplane occurred at 8:30 p.m. when the flight crew received and then acknowledged instructions from Boston Center to climb to 15,000 feet. At 8:29 p.m., Captain Kevorkian was heard on the CVR saying, quote, "Look at that crazy fuel flow indicator there on number 4. See that?" A loud noise was recorded a few tenths of a second later on the CVR, or the cockpit voice recorder. It's very similar to the last noises recorded from other airplanes that have experienced in-flight breakups. The very, very last thing on the CVR was a loud bang. So basically, we have a CVR that's got some electrical interference on it, a couple different times, some weird noises, some audio that we can't really figure out what they were saying. Someone tried to say something, couldn't really pick it up, either due to damage or due to the fact that there was an electrical issue on the plane itself before the explosion. The last recorded radar transponder return from our airplane was recorded by the Federal Aviation Administration, or the FAA, in Traverse, Pennsylvania. Our flight only lasted 12 minutes. I was about 12 sentences into my new Clinton book. So the plane actually went down into the water. And it went down pretty damn fast. And a lot of witnesses in the vicinity said that they saw or heard the explosion. Many witnesses said that it was accompanied by a large fireball, or fireballs, over the ocean, and observed debris, some of which was burning while falling into the water. And some witnesses said that prior to the explosion, they saw sparks heading up toward the aircraft, a streak of light that was described by 38 of 258 witnesses as ascending, moving to a point where a large fireball appeared, and several witnesses reporting that the fireball split into two as it descended toward the water. There was a lot of public interest in the witness reports, and a lot of speculation that the reported streak of light was a missile that was shot at TWA Flight 800 either on purpose or by accident. Because of those witness testimonies, the FBI and the NTSB both were required to investigate this plane crash. In case you don't know, NTSB stands for the National Transportation Safety Board, and I think everybody knows what the FBI stands for. The NTSB and the FBI have never really gotten along well, and there's usually a lot of drama whenever they're working on a case together. The FBI tends to want to find a bad guy. They're always looking for a criminal, for something that was done out of malice, whereas the NTSB is usually looking for something wrong with the aircraft, or a weather anomaly or clear air turbulence or some reason, some purpose for a plane simply falling apart in the sky. Witnesses on the ground were not the only people that saw this event. 38 seconds after the plane had disappeared from air traffic control radar, the captain of East Wind Airlines Boeing 737 reported to Boston Air Traffic Control that he, quote, just saw an explosion out here. We just saw an explosion up ahead of us, about 16,000 feet or something like that. It just went down into the water. Many air traffic control facilities in the New York, Long Island area received reports of an explosion from other pilots operating in the area. Unlike some plane crashes where nobody saw anything, like the ValueJet crash into the Florida Everglades, it blew up in such a high traffic area that not only did people on the ground see this crash, but people in the air saw this crash. There was even a helicopter pilot that was in operation underneath TWA Flight 800, and when it exploded, it was raining debris on this helicopter, and the pilot knew that it would just take one stray piece of debris to hit one of his blades to take him out and put him in the water right with the plane. So, as you can imagine, he got out of the way pretty quick. So the FBI and the NTSB both interviewed witnesses. So it wasn't just one agency or the other. We had two different agencies interviewing witnesses. Approximately 80 FBI agents conducted interviews with potential witnesses daily. No verbatim records of the witness interviews were produced. Instead, the agents who conducted these interviews wrote summaries and then they submitted them. Witnesses were not asked to review or correct the summaries. Included in some of the witness summaries were drawings or diagrams of what the witness observed. Within days of the crash, the NTSB announced its intent to form its own witness group and to interview witnesses to the crash after the FBI raised concerns about non-governmental parties in the NTSB's investigations having access to this information, possible issues prosecuting resulting from multiple interviews of the same witness. It was a mess. Again, the NTSB and the FBI, they don't mix. Search and recovery operations were conducted by federal, state, and local agencies, as well as government contractors. Due to the fact that the explosion had so many witnesses, people were able to get to the site of the explosion very quickly. But unfortunately, there were no survivors. So what they were doing was retrieving bodies and pieces of the airplane. They were looking for the black boxes. A further look at the bodies indicated that there probably couldn't have been a way to survive this explosion. It was a very violent event. And I don't know if any of you have ever seen the movie Final Destination, but I'm almost positive that the beginning scene in Final Destination was based on TWA Flight 800 due to the fact that there was a group of students that were heading to Rome from New York. In Final Destination, they showed the plane exploding pretty soon after takeoff. Not 12 minutes after takeoff like in real life, but seemed to be about the same time of night. Very, very similar circumstances. We can only hope that the events on TWA, the catastrophic in-air breakup, was fast, and hopefully no one saw it coming. So something suspicious was found. Trace amounts of explosive residue were detected on 3 samples of material from 3 separate locations of the recovered wreckage, described by the FBI as a piece of canvas-like material and 2 pieces of a floor panel. These samples were submitted to the FBI's laboratory in Washington, D.C. It was determined that 1 sample contained traces of RDX, another nitroglycerin, and the third a combination of RDX and PETN. I'm going to add the actual chemicals that were found because there's no way that I'm going to be able to pronounce these, and I'll put those in the show notes if possible. So the findings received much media attention at the time, as you could imagine. In addition, it backed several of the witness claims that they saw a missile being shot at TWA Flight 800, and also, if you remember, there was a luggage-passenger mismatch where they didn't realize that the passenger was on the plane, and they thought that the luggage was unattended, as you can imagine, due to the climate. In 1996, as far as terrorism was concerned, everybody was on high alert. The backs of several damaged passenger seats were observed to have an unknown red-brown shaded substance on them. According to the seat manufacturer, though, the locations and appearance of the substance was consistent with the adhesive that was used in the construction of the seats. An additional laboratory testing by NASA identified the substance as being consistent with adhesives. Probably was discolored by the heat. Upon further examination of the airplane's structure, seats and other components of the plane found no damage typically associated with the high-energy explosion of a bomb or a missile. This included in the pieces on which the trace amounts of explosives were found. Of the 5% of the fuselage that was not recovered, none of the missing areas were large enough to have covered all of the damage that would have been caused by the detonation of a bomb or a missile strike. None of the victims' remains showed any evidence of injuries that could have been caused by a high-energy explosive. The NTSB was thinking that the explosive residue was due to contamination from the aircraft's use in 1991, so 5 years earlier, transporting troops during the Gulf War. They also used this plane about a month before to train bomb-sniffing dogs. So that kind of explained why there was explosive residue. So they pretty much took this plane, recovered as much of it as they could, and pieced it back together. So as you can imagine, this was intensive. They went over everything. And on November 18th, 1997, the FBI concluded that the incident was not the result of terrorist activity. The investigation, however, was continued by the NTSB, which released its findings all the way in August 23rd, the year 2000. According to their report, the most probable cause was ignition of a flammable fuel-air mixture in the center wing fuel tank. So if you remember when we were on the plane, when the plane was being refueled, they left that tank alone, and that happens to be the biggest tank. It was nearly empty. They didn't end up filling it up because that much jet fuel wasn't needed for the trip that this plane was taking. If you remember also, our captain, Kevorkian, stating that there was some crazy stuff happening with the fuel flow indicator. When jet fuel is heated hot enough, and it needs to be heated to a temperature that people didn't even know was possible on a plane. And when that happens, steam happens. Jet fuel is not flammable. You're not going to blow up a building by throwing a match into a pool of jet fuel. But vapor, that is very, very flammable. Now, if you remember, it was a very hot night, and the plane was sitting on the hot tarmac with the ACs running. And it was sitting there for longer than it should have been. And also, this plane was purchased in 1971. It was 25 years old when this explosion happened. So I would just go ahead and assume that the wiring on that plane was probably pretty worn out. So it's not unbelievable to think that there would have been a spark that would have ignited the steam created by that fuel tank getting as hot as it did. Just for reference, now in 2021, we usually don't get on an airliner that's that old. Most airlines will retire aircraft from their fleet at about 15 years old. Believe it or not, this shocked me. Spirit Airlines actually has the youngest fleet, and I believe that it's made up of exclusively Airbus. Apparently they don't mess too much with Boeing. They used to be predominantly McDonnell Douglas. And if you are a air disaster enthusiast, you would know that they make the DC-10, which is notorious for crashing. In fact, when the DC itself wasn't crashing, it was taking out other planes. The Concorde, which was the first passenger jet to, I believe, break the sound barrier, was taking off behind a DC-10. In between planes taking off, there needs to be some time because of something called wake turbulence. So the plane taking off in front of another plane will cause turbulence just because of the displacement of air. So the Concorde was waiting its turn behind the DC-10, which a piece fell off of, unbeknownst to the captain of the Concorde. So as the Concorde was taken off, it hit this piece that the DC-10 dropped. Everybody has seen that iconic photo of the Concorde taking off and just fire shooting out of it. It was pretty terrifying. They never even flew the Concorde after that. Not only for that reason, because the Concorde had gone on a few other trips and it was safe. There was no incidents with the Concorde other than the incident that was caused by something falling off of the DC-10. By the way, the DC-10 that was taken off in front of the Concorde, there was no incidents with that flight. It's a little concerning that pieces were already falling off of it, though, as it took off that day. But at the same time, it was a DC-10, so I'm not sure what else anybody would expect. Now, this wiring and fuel tank issue, this wasn't only a problem on TWA Flight 800. This had been a problem previously with the same model of 737s. The other explosions happened while the plane was grounded or was taxiing, but Boeing ended up having to go back to the drawing board and figure out a better placement of this fuel tank. It's really concerning that there was even wires close enough to the fuel tank to even ignite steam. It's also concerning that the steam was even allowed to develop, considering jet fuel should not be getting that hot. But it did sit on the tarmac for a while they figured out the broken down piece of ground equipment and the luggage passenger mismatch. The cause of the TWA 800 explosion wasn't actually ever proven. It's just that that's the most likely answer. But I wanted to know what you guys think. Do you think that it was actually a missile strike?
That's fire.
Either done accidentally or purposely? Do you think that the luggage and the passenger weren't actually mismatched, and that the luggage actually contained a bomb, and that the passenger wasn't on the plane the entire time? Let me know. You can find me at leahjude.com. I'm also on social media. Go to leahjude.com, all the links are there. If you'd like to check out my music, or just say hi, or DM and let me know your opinion on TWA Flight 800, I would love to hear it. Fringe Radio Network, of course, is also all over social media, as well as their website, fringeradionetwork.com. If you'd like to talk to somebody from the Fringe about TWA, I'm sure they'd love to talk about it. Thank you guys for going on our ill-fated flight tonight.
That's fire.
And I will see you in the next one. Bye.